The town had been muffled before I ever noticed the wrongness. Not strange in the loud, cinematic way, but in the subtle way a familiar road feels slightly out of tune, like a piano that insists on one flat note. Streetlights hummed, as if an old radio had been left between stations. The sound was thin and persistent, a backbone to the silence. Dogs that used to bark at midnight lay motionless, as though exhausted by their own memories, when I began spending nights walking corners and reading faces to pry loose private tensions. The air around me felt thicker, like a page that had been turned and never quite dried, clinging to the skin of things. At first, the signs were small and stuttered. A fountain in the square rippled toward its center instead of outward, as if seeking a gravity no one had noticed. A neighbor's porch light burned steady but cast no shadow at all. A daytime radio show played on, but the adverts were gone, replaced by a distant clicking rhythm that kept time I could not match. People laughed, but their smiles would flicker. They held eye contact a beat too long, as if testing whether the world would answer back. I was, by trade and temperament, a practitioner of suspense. I had learned to sniff out the frayed edges of fear, and I cataloged these slips in a battered notebook, with the clinical calm of someone giving directions in a storm. Those notes became a map of eroding certainties. Sleep began to peel itself from me in ragged layers. Dreams lodged there like keys in the throat of waking, harder to swallow than to speak. In daylight, time misplaced itself. 5 minutes stretched into an hour collapsed into a blink. Faces I thought I knew reassembled wrong. A woman at the bakery carried a shadow that belonged to a different day, and a child in front of the grocer said my name as if reciting a nursery rhyme he didn't know he'd learned. People were polite until they weren't, until a stranger in a cafe leaned over and told me, very softly, that the place we lived had been shifting, like a book on a shelf sliding an inch every night, a change so small only the margins could feel it. The friction turned into a narrative I could follow. I followed whispers into the scrub behind the old observatory where the earth tasted faintly of metal. The trees there leaned in impossible directions. Their rings seemed to spiral instead of circle. Above them, stars did not sit like pinpricks, but dissolved into shifting patterns that my brain remembered and then forgot, as if someone had erased the same map twice. A presence in that scrub was not a body to film or a trace to fingerprint, but a topology of attention, a field that hummed with expectation and watched the ways we expected closure. It rearranged probabilities. All lights would blink once, perfectly synchronized, like a held breath released at once. In the dark, a geometry without angles outlined itself, and my understanding of distance folded inward. When it revealed itself, it was neither beast nor machine. It was the shape of being watched by a collective question. Language insisted on failing, metaphors bending under the weight of directness. What it offered, oddly, was an alignment. If you looked long enough, you could feel the edges of your life begin to separate from you, as if your narrative were a garment that might be turned inside out. I tried to write it down to anchor one last reasonable version, but the page refused to hold the patterns. In the end, I returned to my street and found my house quietly rearranged, so the hallway led outward into a place with no address, and someone or something had left my handwriting on a mirror, scrawled and final. Stop asking questions. The door closed behind me with the soft, indisputable finality of a sentence,